In 1994, the wife of the Queen's cousin became the first senior member of the British royal family in over 3 centuries to convert to Catholicism. A few years later, she gave up her royal title entirely and started teaching primary school music under a name none of her students recognized. Katharine Worsley grew up at Hovingham Hall in Yorkshire, the youngest child of a baronet, and married Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, in 1961 at York Minster, the first royal wedding held there in over 600 years. The Duke served in the military from 1955 until 1976, and for long stretches of those years, the young couple lived in postings outside Britain. Following his regiment rather than settling into a fixed royal household in London, the way some of her in-laws did. She had 3 children with him, George, Helen, and Nicholas, and for the better part of 2 decades performed the role expected of a senior royal, most visibly at Wimbledon, where she spent years presenting the trophies at Centre Court and became known nationally for a single, unscripted moment in 1993, when she stepped forward to console a devastated Jana Novotná after her runner-up defeat. Away from the tennis court, she volunteered for the Samaritans, the crisis helpline charity, and traveled internationally as an ambassador for UNICEF. The press covered a different side of her just as closely, naming her one of the world's best-dressed women more than once, and once photographing her in a miniskirt on Oxford Street. A rare image of a royal wife dressed for the current decade rather than the institution. Katharine herself later admitted she had never quite felt confident in the role, saying it was part of why she spent so much of her later life trying to build up other people's self-esteem, since she knew firsthand what it was like to go without it. Behind that public role, her life had already been marked by loss. In 1977, an illness with rubella led to a miscarriage, and the depression that followed was serious enough that she withdrew from public duties for a time to recover. She spoke about the experience only rarely and never in detail, which was itself consistent with how the family generally handled private grief. What made her account of that period unusual, when she did eventually address it, was how directly she connected her own struggle to her later insistence on building up other people rather than herself. Treating the years of low confidence not as something to hide entirely, but as the specific reason behind decisions she made decades afterward. The turn toward Catholicism came later, and by her own account, gradually. On the 14th of January 1994, more than 3 decades into her marriage, Cardinal Basil Hume received her into the Catholic Church at Archbishop's House in London. No senior figure in the family had done anything similar since the 17th century, when the last Catholic monarch had been forced from the throne entirely. Before making the announcement public, she discussed the decision directly with Queen Elizabeth, who gave her approval, a step that mattered both personally and constitutionally. Since the monarch remains the supreme governor of the Church of England to this day, in a BBC interview afterward, she explained the appeal in plain terms. She said she loved guidelines, that the Catholic Church offered them, and that she had always wanted structure of that kind in her life. She wasn't the only one in her extended family the decision would eventually touch. Her own son, the Earl of St. Andrews, had already lost his place in the line of succession in 1988 for marrying a Catholic. Under the same centuries-old law, her own conversion sat outside of, since marrying in wasn't legally identical to converting yourself. 2 of her grandchildren would later convert as well, and lose their succession rights in turn. It meant that within a single family, 3 different generations ended up navigating the same 17th century law from 3 different directions: a son who married into the faith, a mother who converted into it directly, and grandchildren who followed her example decades later, each triggering the same legal consequence for entirely different personal reasons. In 2002, she took the more unusual step of giving up her HRH style altogether, asking to be known simply as Catharine Kent or Kate. Around the same time, she had already begun something almost no one outside her immediate circle knew about. In 1996, she visited Wansbeck Primary School in Hull, offered to help with music lessons, and ended up staying for 13 years, giving a weekly 40-minute class, and working with the school choir under her own first name. With most parents and pupils never realizing a duchess was standing in front of them. She was a trained pianist, organist, and singer in her own right, skills that had nothing to do with her royal title, and everything to do why the school welcomed her offer of help in the first place. Years afterward, she described the job in a way she never used for any of her ceremonial duties, calling it one of the most exciting jobs anyone could do, and adding that she loved the children, loved being there, and loved the part of whole the school sat in enough that she wouldn't have stayed 13 years otherwise. She later taught part-time at a school attended by children from families displaced by the Grenfell Tower fire, and returned in 2018 for the first anniversary memorial at the base of the building. By then she was in her 80s, and the choice to keep showing up, first in an unassuming classroom and later at a memorial for a tragedy that had nothing to do with the royal family directly, followed the same pattern as everything else in her later life: quiet presence over public statement, small consistent commitment over grand gesture. She rarely spoke publicly about why she chose that particular way of living out her later years, but the shape of the choice was consistent and repeated. It wasn't a single dramatic exit from royal life. It was a series of smaller decisions, spread out over more than 2 decades, each one moving her further from the visibility Wimbledon had given her and closer to a classroom where nobody clapped when she walked in. Katharine, Duchess of Kent, died at Kensington Palace on the 4th of September 2025 at the age of 92. Her funeral, held at Westminster Cathedral on the 16th of September, was the first Catholic requiem mass for a member of the royal family in modern British history, attended by the King and Queen alongside the rest of her immediate family. Her son, the Duke of Kent, and her daughter, Lady Helen Taylor, walked behind the coffin as it was carried into the cathedral by soldiers from the Royal Dragoon Guards, a regiment she had supported for decades. The choice of location was hers. She had asked specifically for Westminster Cathedral, rather than the abbey most of her family had been married and buried from, a small final decision that summed up the larger pattern of her life. Given the option, she generally chose the version of an occasion that belonged to her personally, rather than the one that belonged to the institution she had married into. The woman who had once knelt to comfort a stranger's tears on television's most-watched court was buried according to a faith she had chosen for herself, in a ceremony her own family had never had reason to hold before.